on his way. Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker, or the devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
We say fuck a lot.
Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Mountain Murders.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
This is episode 264, Dylan.
Wow.
Can you believe it?
That was a lot.
We have a lot of content.
It's a good bit. Been doing this for a minute.
I've been doing it for a minute. And we are back with Charles Manson Part 2.
Oh, it's true. And we've had some great feedback from doing one of the, I would argue this is top 3 to top 5, right?
Yeah.
Cases of true crime, which we steer away from. But we've really enjoyed it. But I think Heather almost broke her brain digging into the archives to find information that you may not have heard of before.
Well, there's a lot. In the Charles Manson story, many of these characters pop up and you hear their names, but you don't know exactly how they're associated with Manson or understand what their deal is. So hopefully in part 2, I'll be able to dive in, explain some of these connections. I think it's helpful to see how folks ended up maybe becoming part of the family or on the fringes of the family.
Yeah, you think you would have been part of the family?
I don't think so. I'm not much of a joiner.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I'd be like, man, this guy's full of shit.
I've never had a personality that was willing to follow anyone. I've always kind of just marched to the beat of my own little drummer.
Even if I may have been hanging out and getting high, let's be honest. But at a certain, anytime there's something weird or someone says something like, oh, we should go over there and kill some people, I would be like, whoa, hold up. Let me out of the car, right? I'm not having any part of that.
But I think you have to understand, Dylan, and we're going to talk about this in the episode, there was a lot of grooming taking place.
Yeah, I don't think you can groom me to that point. I'm just saying that's me, my personality. You're not, if you keep saying, I think you should go kill these people or trying to lead me around, because see, the way my brain works, when you're trying to lead me or manipulate me, I already see where you're trying to take me. And I'm already casting my judgments, and I'm already thinking you're a piece of shit.
Well, I manipulate you all the time.
That's not true.
I bend you to my will.
Ooh.
That's why you're sitting here podcasting with
That's
me.
not, I'm doing it because I want to, I think.
Exactly.
Oh, before we go any further, I must shout out a very special person.
Thank you.
Yes, I would like to thank Vicky, today's sponsor of Mountain Murders.
Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you very much for contributing at patreon.com/Mountain Murders Podcast.
You got it right, Dylan.
Oh, so Vicky wanted to access all the extra and ad-free content, and we wish her luck on that journey.
Okay, are you ready to get started?
Yes, let's do it. Because
we're going to kick the show off before we get into the case. I'm going to play you a clip from a Charles Manson interview with Diane Sawyer, just so we can hear how Charlie interacts with Diane and what he has to say. All right? Let's take a listen.
If you are me and I am you, everything you do is for you, is for me too.
So what did they think?
If you're in
they
one
were
mind, if
achieving
I am
for
you and you are me and we are all together, and then who's responsible for come together over me right now? It's all his fault. Oh, no, it's his fault. No, we put another false face on it. It's Halloween. It's your fault. So now, wait a minute. Criminal behavior's the same. It's mundane in most minds. Criminal will always go to a familiar place. Tex had been to that house. Tex went back to that house. Here's the conversation. Indian Mesa. We got 4 campfires. We got 4 queens on a motorcycle gang, a motorcycle group that rides SS motorcycles out of Venice, Santa Monica. So we're riding motorcycles and we're all up there and we got these fires going and we got this big problem that came up. I had to go shoot somebody for Tex. Bobby's in prison. My brother's in jail. Now, understand my mind, all my life I've been in jail because I didn't have no one to get me out of jail. I didn't have no brother outside. So I spent years and years and years and years just because nobody would come and sign their name and get me out of jail. And the jail couldn't let me out because I didn't have no place to go. So I spent 22 years in prison because I didn't have nobody outside. I can't let somebody that's with me stay in jail. It just ain't, it's not in my makeup, man. I got to get my brother out of jail.
So you needed money to do that.
Well, here's the division between your mind and my mind. Here's where the chamber opens up. When you get in trouble, you go to your mother. You call up mother. I ain't got no mother to call. Well, you go to the bank, draw some money, pay a lawyer. I ain't got no money. I can't go to no lawyer. I go to a lawyer, I ain't got enough money. I got a little money, and anytime anybody knows anything about lawyers, when you got a little money, they're just taking that. They'll take the little money and let you sue them in court. You dig? In other words, like, I don't have enough money to go to the lawyer to get Bobby out. So everybody's standing around, and I said, pay me. Pay me what you owe me now. And they said, well, how do we do that? I said, get my brother out of jail. He said, how do we do it? I said, I don't know how you do it. I don't care how you do it. Do it now. Do it. And they said, how do we do it? I said, don't ask me how to do it. I don't want to be no part of no conspiracy. But however you do it and get it done now.
Well, Dylan, what do you think about Charlie in his own words?
Well, I must say, anytime I listen to any of his interviews at length, it's either A, he's completely innocent and been railroaded, or B, he completely believes his own bullshit. It's one of the two, right? There's no other choice.
Okay.
Do you agree with that?
I don't know. Sometimes I think he makes sense. Other times he's playing the crazy game.
Well, that's to say, just because what did go on to happen and how it all played out, that doesn't mean he's never said anything that makes sense, right? I mean, he has that ability.
All right. So Charlie begins studying on the streets of the Haight, drifting from one guru to another. If you remember when we left you last episode, he had made plans that becoming a spiritual leader, a guru of sorts, was the thing he needed to be doing. He needed to be in the guru business.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, it's a pretty sweet gig, right?
You think so?
You just sit around and tell people what you think about stuff, and somehow all the utility bills get paid, and you have plenty of weed to smoke.
Dylan's church of setting and a looking?
Yeah.
Okay. He memorized their best lines because, again, he's traveling around San Francisco. He'll sit in on one guru's spiel and then move on to the next spiritual leader. And he just adopts little pieces of philosophy from each person, the best lines that they have.
Oh, so he's poaching their words and kind of putting them in his own playbook.
Yep. Financially, Charlie continues relying on Mary Bruner. And if you remember, she was the librarian at UC Berkeley. Their relationship is very one-sided, with the scales tipped to Charlie's favor. Part of Charlie's gospel includes philosophies of living free, which meant giving up material possessions, ego, and individuality. He would say, quote, the more you give up, the more you have.
Oh, that has not worked for me yet.
He taught breaking away from society's restraints to love everybody. Charlie, who was charismatic, was not only entertaining, but enlightening. He was a theatrical orator. People listened to him, they shared their drugs with him, and girls had sex with him.
Now, have you ever thought that was kind of weird? Because, I mean, he's just this little kind of weird guy. Or did he fit in with like the late 60s, 70s look? What do you think about that? It's from a woman's perspective.
I don't find Charlie particularly attractive, okay? I mean, he's not like, some people will act like he's just this ugly little troll. And I wouldn't say he's like an ugly little troll. He's not great looking, but he's not hideous. I mean, he's not like a swamp creature, right? I think, for me, I don't really have a type. I go with personality, that and sense of humor, like and intelligence, like those sorts of traits in a man. So I don't know if a guy looked like Charlie, but he was funny and made me laugh and whatever. I mean, I might give him a chance.
Well, I think it's the big beard and long hair that gives every guy a certain look. You know what I mean?
I mean, he definitely had the look of the hippie.
Yeah, and they
youth.
may clean up quite a bit, if you trim some of that down. But I think Charlie, an acoustic guitar, and a few good one-liners, and you may have been part of the family.
You think I might have been?
Yeah.
I don't know, Dylan. I'm into people who shower.
Oh.
And as we'll learn later, Charlie was kind of grody.
Ah, so he was gross.
Yeah. Yeah. He was not the most hygienic man on the planet. So I probably would have issues with that.
Yeah, I can smell his beard from here.
You know how I feel about a stinky jungle? I'm not into that. Okay. So recruiting was not as easy as he'd imagined. The young hippies of Haight-Ashbury were fickle. They might pledge their allegiance to Charlie one day, but tomorrow move on to follow another guru. He decided the ideal recruit was needy, bruised people, but not totally damaged, because he just felt like he couldn't do anything with someone who was so far gone, just completely damaged as a person.
So basically, he wants someone who pledges their true allegiance to him and will do and listen to him, but he wants someone to still be able to kind of function.
Yes.
And in turn probably do things for him.
Exactly.
Okay.
He began a stringent recruiting process, vetting potential family members by what they could bring to the table and how they could serve Charlie. Growing tired of the Haight district, Charlie began heading up and down the coast for 2 to 3 day trips, mostly hitchhiking. In May of 1967, Charlie had hitchhiked to Venice. While wandering the beach area, he saw a young woman crying. The 18-year-old ginger-headed girl was just the kind of recruit he was looking for. Lynette Frome, known as Lynn, was from Redondo Beach. She had a history of emotional problems, a strict, domineering father. Though Frome had been a talented child who was involved in a singing and dance troupe and had even appeared on a national TV show once, she'd fallen into sex and drugs as a teenager. Lynn had attempted suicide twice and was rumored to have had an affair with a teacher when she was in high school.
Oh, so you have a girl who has issues, who's had some things happen to her in the past. I think it's interesting that she has a domineering father figure in her life. And so Charlie can kind of slide in and still be the strong-handed male figure in her life, but be a little nicer about it, right? A little cooler about it. So I could see this working for him.
At the time, Lynette was enrolled at El Camino College. Charlie told Lynn, quote, "The way out of a room is not through the door. Just don't want out and you're free."
I don't know what that means. Do you? Do you get that?
I mean, I would interpret it, Dylan, is that if you're in an unhappy situation, your first instinct is to leave. But when you kind of free your mind
the rest will follow.
Of the, restraints or these, these impositions that are troubling you, then, you can just sort of like let it go. And then it doesn't bother you anymore.
So In Vogue was
But
trying
I
to
don't
tell
know.
us the same sentiment.
Maybe, I don't know.
Okay.
It's late and I can't interpret this for you. He insisted fate had brought them together and invited the young woman to San Francisco. At first, she declined the offer, but as soon as Charlie left, she ran after him. She had bought his lines, hook and sinker.
Yeah, he's already got her on the hook, and he I'm sure he recognizes that.
Charlie took her to Mary's apartment. Once they're back in San Francisco, Charlie had sex with Lynn while Mary watched. Then he had sex with Mary while Lynn watched.
Well, I mean, tit for tat.
Soon after Lynn's arrival, the trio found a cheap apartment in the Haight and moved there, because if you remember, Mary Bruner was still living over in the Berkeley area. Somehow he managed to do some trading until he ended up with a Volkswagen minibus. He befriended a man named Dean Morehouse, who had a teenage daughter named Ruth Ann. Charlie was smitten with Ruth Ann because she was incredibly beautiful and just the kind of front street girl he needed to recruit men into the family.
So he's always thinking like these 3 moves ahead kind of thing. Like he meets a person, he doesn't just, they're cool, maybe we could hang out. He's thinking of what can this person do for me? Just like you said, what do they bring to the table? And I think that's a very strange way to view the world.
And I believe Ruth Ann was only 14 or 15 when he met her.
Of course she was.
When she ran away from home at some point, she went to Charlie, and he was arrested for interfering with the questioning of a runaway. He tells Ruth Ann, you need to go find a husband and get married so you can be emancipated. And then you will be able to do whatever you want to do. That was his advice to Ruth Ann, this underage girl.
Okay.
Yeah. So Ruth Ann told Charlie she would wait for him to summon her. Charlie ended up receiving a 30-day suspended sentence and 3 years tacked on to his probation for the Ruth Ann incident, the interfering with the questioning of a runaway.
I've honestly never heard that charge, but I mean, I could, I guess, agree with it in sentiment. Like if you're keeping the police from making contact with a runaway, then you're kind of standing in the way. So, yeah, I reckon.
Ruth Ann did indeed get married and waited to hear from Charlie again. Life in Haight-Ashbury was chaotic, overcrowded, and unsanitary. If you listen to our midweek episode, you may have gotten a little taste of what life was actually like.
Yeah, it was too much. There's way too many people, way too few resources, and it's not a very big area, and it's very quickly becomes gross and like dangerously unhealthy.
Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club album was released by the Beatles and became the anthem of the summer. 36 race riots broke out across the United States, and 53% of those arrested were young black men. Charlie called these commodity riots because the arrestees were charged with looting, stealing, and burning down their own communities, which was something he noted. His racism was a topic that he typically steered away from discussing, especially in the company of the women. But around men, Charlie spoke more freely about his disdain for the black race. Rapes, drug overdoses, and diseases plagued San Francisco. Homeless hippies were exposed to chilly nights, sleeping wherever they could, and with that came a lot of illnesses like pneumonia. As a straight-laced zoology student at UC Berkeley in the 1950s, Dr. David Smith, he never imagined himself as a drug expert giving free medical care to ailing hippies in the middle of the Summer of Love. And we spoke a bit about Dr. Smith last episode in the midweek. But after working at the drug and alcohol screening unit at San Francisco General Hospital, he saw the need for a clinic in the Haight. On June 9th, he opened the clinic with a few rules. No one would be turned away if they couldn't pay, and staff would make no moral judgments. Opening day, more than 250 people lined up to be treated for hepatitis, pneumonia, various STDs, skin and gum infections, dysentery, and malnutrition, as well as a few who had had botched abortions.
Yeah, that's interesting because I don't know a lot of background on Dr. David Smith, and then it's a good thought. Hey, these people need help. Can I provide it? But then it does make me think, like, who financed this clinic from the beginning? Because there has to be some kind of money there. I mean, it's not like you're just, handing out Band-Aids. You're actually...
And how did someone decide that he would become Charlie's probation officer?
Well, that's Roger Smith.
Oh, Roger
No,
Smith.
it is confusing because there's two
Yes,
Smiths,
that's
no
true.
relations. But
both are working
both end up
at this clinic.
in the free
Okay.
clinic, and
Thanks for correcting me.
They both end up heading studies on various types of drug use that are funded studies, which is very strange. So I wonder, how did David Smith come up with the money, the capital to start this free clinic in the first place? So it's very interesting.
Well, in the beginning, I think he was able to use some of his own money just to get the space opened. And he did have some folks donating like medical supplies, and he got a lot of the staff to work pro bono.
Okay.
Like nurses and other doctors to just volunteer their time. But they quickly ran out of supplies. I mean, they only had a limited number of bandages and thermometers and Tylenol to give out, So funding the clinic, as you mentioned, Dylan, was trickier. Bill Graham was a music promoter. He arranged fundraising concerts at the Fillmore with artists like Big Brother and the Holding Company. Janis Joplin, this big show she put on to raise money, they made about $5,000.
Oh, wow.
And this was like kind of near and dear to Janis's heart because she was a regular clinic patient. She lived in the Haight, and she was doing drugs and practicing free love like everybody else. So
Sucking down that Southern comfort.
you got to go get your chlamydia treated.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
So in the beginning, and I could see people that had a little influence in the area seeing that there's this desperate need for this type of facility inside the Haight. So that makes sense there.
So there were like other like concerts organized and sort of different fundraising events. That was just one of the big ones. The city of San Francisco, however, was looking for any reason to shut down the clinic. They were subject to constant inspections and undercover cops trying to score free drugs. Like almost daily raids of the clinic. It had to be obnoxious.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you truly started this in the spirit of helping people, and then it's like you have to imagine the city sees that what's going on, and that are issues there. No matter how it happened, there's still issues that need to be dealt with, and they're kind of ignoring it and just trying to sweep everything into the gutter.
A sign in the window read, quote, "No dealing, no holding, and no using dope. Any of these can close the clinic. We love you."
The very same sign hangs in my car.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's true.
I thought it said ass, gas, or grass.
Well, that's on the other side.
Or a cheeseburger. Or beer. Nobody rides for free.
Wait, did you just add cheeseburger to the ass, gas, or grass bumper sticker that's legendary?
No.
Or cheeseburger?
No.
You would accept that in payment for a ride.
I do love a good cheeseburger. My tummy does not. With heroin, meth, and LSD filling the Haight, there was no shortage of brawls and muggings. At some point, Dylan, because of, I guess, a drought and what have you, marijuana dried up and was harder to find
Oh my
than
God.
the other drugs.
These are one of this might be the single biggest issue to hit the Haight at this point.
Right. So they're looking for other drugs, and that's when these dealers start introducing them to this heavier shit, like heroin and methamphetamines, speed, crank, whatever you want to call it.
Well, in any area, you take the police busting the right type of person at a certain level, it can literally affect an entire region as far as them getting the illegal drug. So if they were to pop somebody way up the chain on marijuana who literally deals in hundreds of pounds instead of ounces or whatever, then that very well could create this type of drought that you're describing.
Yeah, but I actually think it was a literal drought.
Like a drought killed the marijuana crop?
Like there was not enough rain to help produce the marijuana crop.
Oh my God.
That's
ridiculous.
kind of what I meant, but yes.
That's scary.
Something like that.
Okay.
We'll just pretend it was the big drug dealer got pinched.
So there's no weed, then that creates this vacuum, this room for other drugs to kind of work into the crowd.
Yes.
Okay.
Because everybody just wants to get high, man.
Man, that's a big difference from, especially marijuana back then was way less potent than it is nowadays. And then going from there to things like LSD, mushrooms, these kind of stronger, more psychedelic drugs.
But you probably have to imagine a lot of these kids, nowadays we know more about drugs probably than ever before, right? And the effects, the implications. But you have to think about this time. They didn't go through like a DARE program in school. These kids were like corn-fed kids from Nebraska who popped off a bus in San Francisco with $5 in their pocket, and they probably don't know the dangers of heroin or that taking methamphetamines is very bad for you.
No, because they've literally maybe drank a beer or maybe smoked a joint.
And if a dealer's telling them, like, this is going to get you high, you're going to feel great, it's better than marijuana, they're probably like, sure, So I think you have to kind of consider that maybe people were not as educated on the severity of addiction and being hooked on these drugs.
I think that's a fair point.
Drug dealers were robbing each other. It was like the fucking Wild West. I mean, when we mentioned midweek episode, the crimes that were happening, there was some fucking vicious shit going on.
Yeah, those crimes you described in our midweek were they were heinous crimes. They were horrible.
And this scene was too much for even Charles Manson. People were no longer wearing flowers in their hair, but instead they lay in alleys with needles sticking out of their necks. He loaded up his women and began road tripping up and down the East Coast because if you remember, he's somehow managed to get his hands on a Volkswagen minibus.
He's got his barter van.
He does. They spent a few days in Mendocino, which was like an artist community, but the artists there did not want Charlie and his girls hanging around because they were just gross and they were littering, causing a scene, just throwing their fucking trash out. And regular people who lived there, even though they were kind of artsy, funky folks, they were just like, no. We don't want this dude around.
Well, yeah, that's just rude.
Charlie met a guy named Bobby Beausoleil, who is going to play a big part in our story. And I've always wondered, how was Bobby connected to Charlie? So I was able to do a bit of a dive and get you guys the 411, right? So Charlie met this guy, Bobby Beausoleil. He was the front man for the chamber orchestra. He was in town playing music for a Kenneth Anger event about Aleister Crowley. Now, Anger had fronted thousands of dollars to rent a venue, and he didn't even recuperate the funds that he had spent to rent the venue. He thought he was going to make a ton of money with this Aleister Crowley event. Live music. He's been working on this film. And yeah, he basically loses his ass on this event. But while he is in town, what's his face is able to meet him. Charlie. Meets Bobby Beausoleil. And they kind of hit it off. Here's another musician. Seems like a cool guy, right?
So he's done, Bobby has done this event, this Aleister Crowley themed event, and lost his ass.
Kenneth Anger is a well-known sort of avant-garde artist guy. Pretty famous. He wrote a book called Hollywood Babylon that was a lot of celebrity gossip back in the day. A lot of the stories are made up or unconfirmed, but it created these rumors about these celebrities that have endured for decades. Right? He was a filmmaker. He kind of did avant-garde performance art, like this type of event where he might show a weird silent film, but then have an orchestra there playing the soundtrack.
Yeah, I think that would be something I wouldn't get. I don't even know what avant-garde means. Avant-garde.
Okay.
What does it mean? Is it like a conceptual, or is it perspective, or is... I don't see those words have nothing to do with it, right? So that just shows you.
Well, Dylan, avant-garde is very experimental types of art, something that is strange and unusual, out of the ordinary.
Ah.
So just anything that's bizarre or different. I know, it's been probably a year ago, we talked about adrenochrome, and we brought up what's her name? Marina Abramovich, the Serbian artist. I believe she's from Serbia.
Oh, yeah.
Artist, and how she painted in blood weird words on a room, and she called it spirit cooking, right? And had strange little statues of children with blood poured on them in the corners.
Very strange.
Right? That would be considered avant-garde.
Okay, so it really doesn't have any structure.
Just something very strange and out of the ordinary.
Okay.
Okay?
That makes sense.
Experimental.
Okay, so...
Just throwing some art on the wall and seeing if it sticks.
Well, that's interesting. I'm sure some really cool stuff's come out of that very concept. So here Charlie is. It's funny how he just kind of rubs elbows with all these different people during his life.
Well, he does. I mean, Kenneth Anger, he's I'm not going to say super famous, but, he's a famous person in his own right. And here's Bobby Beausoleil, who happens to be playing music for Kenneth Anger. And from what I understand, Beausoleil was under some kind of strange contract with Anger to record and compose a soundtrack for this film. that he was working on, which turns out it's a film called Lucifer Rising that Anger spent like years working on. And part of this Aleister Crowley event or exhibition or whatever you want to call it, part of that was for the Lucifer Rising film and was supposed to help kind of promote this movie he was going to be releasing at some point, even though he'd been working on it for like 6 years or, you know, I don't know.
I can totally see what's going on here. He's going to use Crowley and the whole idea behind that and the rigmarole to kind of push his stuff up to the top there.
Right. And so we're kind of getting off on a tangent because I'm sure that could be its own episode, right? So Bobby and Charlie kind of rub elbows here in San Francisco. Now, if you remember, Charlie's kind of just traveling all around with these ladies. They're back in San Francisco, then they're in Mendocino, and then they're out in the desert, and then they're back in San Francisco. So they're just kind of all over the place at this time. So Bobby and Charlie meet up, hang out, whatever. And then Beausoleil left San Francisco hurriedly after the event because allegedly he stole Anger's film canisters for the movie Lucifer Rising.
Oh, God.
Beausoleil went to Los Angeles and moved in with his friend Gary Hinman in Topanga Canyon. Beausoleil and Gary Hinman are going to be a pretty integral part of the story as we get deeper into Manson. Mary was no longer employed as a librarian. She got fired because, again, you can't drive around on a minibus for days at a time and not go to work.
Yeah, I can't imagine that a librarian has that much PTO.
Right. So she gets canned. They can no longer afford an apartment. You know, money's not there because she was sort of their meal ticket, right? And then Charlie met Patricia Krenwinkel, who joined their group. The family was living hand to mouth, panhandling, and Charlie preyed on newcomers. Anyone who had cash or credit cards, people who were nice enough to offer up their homes to the group. I mean, Charlie would just use them as much as he could. And Charlie always supplied weed and mellow acid trips while he preached. The girls always had a roof over their heads and full stomachs, even if no one was working. Life with Charlie, in a way, was okay. I mean, they never went hungry. They didn't have to sleep in the alleys or out in the park.
So even though they're not doing these 9-to-5s and all this stuff, the normal square stuff, they're still getting their needs met for the most part.
Right. However, the women learned pretty quickly that if they didn't give Charlie his proper respect that Aretha was singing about,
Oh,
the RESPECT, give me my propers, right? That he would take action like yanking their hair.
oh, okay.
Mary Bruner seemed to always have a black eye and bruises.
So he was physically abusive.
To Mary Bruner particularly, but the other girls he mostly would just like pull the shit out of their hair.
Okay, that's strange to me that you would let this little slightly built guy do that to you. But I digress.
Charlie spent most of his time writing songs and playing music. He wanted more men to join them, but needed to recruit some what he called hot chicks to make that happen. He felt the women with him were B grade, and some of them kind of homely.
Oh, so he needed some like top tier A-team bitches.
Yeah, because I mean, he thought like, you know, Lynette from, I mean, she's got like a certain kind of cute pixie quality about her. Mary Bruner, he described her as being pretty homely.
Well, I mean, I've seen, I couldn't name them their faces, but I've seen video of the girls and stuff like that, and they weren't like atrocious looking or anything. I mean, maybe if anything, you describe a couple of them as maybe a plain Jane, if you will, right?
Right. And
So-
that's what he feels like the girls he has now in Lynn and Mary, Patricia Krenwinkel. I mean, he thinks they're all kind of just,
Yeah, but I mean, do you really think you're going to get this, stable of hot chicks to bring in dudes left and right? I mean, in his mind, I'm wondering if he really thinks his ranks are going to swell to, all these different people.
Well, you'd be surprised, Dylan.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, exactly. because he does end up recruiting some seriously hot chicks. And as I mentioned, Ruth Ann Morehouse, the very underage girl that we discussed a few minutes ago, she was gorgeous.
Well, she was a kid too, so she's going to
I'm
fall
just
for his
saying,
bullshit.
she's really pretty. And Diane Lake was very pretty. I mean, he does recruit some very attractive women to, considering it's Charlie. So 20-year-old Susan Atkins was what Charlie considered the perfect recruit. She was cute. She had grown up in San Jose, singing in church choir and caring for her mother, who was dying of cancer. After her mother's death, Susan spiraled out of control, fighting with her father, and eventually dropped out of school and ran away from home. Susan had previously spent 3 months in jail for armed robbery in Oregon and was serving 2 years probation. Susan craved attention, acceptance, and was easily manipulated by Charlie. Before meeting Charlie, she had worked as a topless dancer and was even hired by Anton LaVey to become a part of the Witches' Sabbath Club, where she worked as a topless female vampire.
Oh, whoa.
Which, let's be honest, this is my dream job. Why can't I be a topless female vampire?
You would interview for this job right now, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, they'd probably be like, no, you're old.
If the venue was appropriate.
But I would be like, come on, man. I want to be a topless female vampire. This would have been like the perfect job for me in my, young days. When I was 40 pounds lighter. And anywho. She did not make it very long working for LaVey, because despite what a lot of people think about him, he did have some class about him.
Yeah, a lot of people think he's just this total piece of shit, but I've heard it said both ways about him. He had an idea of what he was trying to do. Sure, was he trying to shock everybody around him? I think that was obvious. But yeah, he did have some kind of standards and, the way he wanted to conduct himself.
Right. And he fired her because she was actively using drugs and also spreading gonorrhea around to the customers. And LaVey was just like, this is not going to work.
Look, the drugs and anal sex is fine, but the gonorrhea, it's too much.
Well, I didn't say anything about anal sex, but yes.
Well, it's LaVey, dude. I mean, if you know anything about him, there's going to be mentions of anal sex.
I think you mean Crowley.
Oh, God. I apologize.
You don't even know what you're talking about.
I totally apologize. I so often confuse LaVey and Crowley, and that was my bad.
No, Crowley's the one that was...
Crowley's the gross one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, LaVey was not out preaching butt sex. That was Crowley and his Telema or whatever. So you're wrong. I'm right. Let's move along. So later, Atkins would say there was no limit to what she would do for Charlie. He was the only complete man she'd ever met, and Manson represented a Jesus Christ-like person to her.
Wow.
Yeah. People also say that Susan Atkins was not the brightest bulb in the tanning bed either. Actually, a few folks said that a lot of the women who hung out with Charlie were not the most academic.
Well, and that doesn't surprise me that someone like that, male or female, draws these people around them that are easily manipulated, do not have strong critical thinking skills, and that's the very type of person that these people seek out, right?
Right. So with a growing family, Charlie traded the minibus for a school bus, which they painted a swirl of color and wrote the words Hollywood Productions on the side. Charlie had the women sleeping with potential male recruits, and they were not allowed to use birth control. He said it was unnatural. They loaded up this school bus with sleeping bags. Everybody's just hanging out in the bus. They took the seats out.
Oh, wow.
Had the sleeping bags.
This is the van life.
I think. Yeah.
This is the beginning of van life.
Mary Bruner became pregnant with Charlie's baby at this time. STDs were rampant, so the women were regulars at the free clinic. Dr. Smith thought Charlie was a con artist who was taking advantage of the young women. There were opportunities for him to speak with Charlie on occasion, and he just wasn't a big fan of him. And would kind of tell these young women, maybe hanging out with this guy's not the best thing for you.
Yeah, this is the 7th time you've been here this month for a clap.
Yeah.
So maybe you need to stop and calm down a little bit.
They're making them cheeks clap with the clap. Okay. All right. So Ruth Ann Morehouse's father, Dean, eventually tracks Charlie down and holds a gun to his head. But Manson was able to talk him down, dose him with some LSD, and converted Dean to be a follower. And then Dean Morehouse loved Charlie.
One of the girls' dad.
Yeah.
No way.
The underage girl.
No way.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Well, Charlie had kind of befriended Dean in the beginning.
Right. That's how he met it. That's how he knew of the girl.
Yeah. Met the daughter.
Right.
Then the girl runs away, and then Dean tries to track him down, but then becomes Charlie's BFFE again.
Well, I guess it goes to speak on Charles's charisma and his just ability to manipulate people like this, talk them down, make them believe his bullshit.
Well, he did graduate from the How to Win Friends and Influence People prison course.
It's true.
Okay. So by late 1967, Charlie and the women had moved to Los Angeles. There was a rift between Los Angeles and San Francisco musicians. Frank Zappa said, quote, "No matter how peace and love the San Fran bands might try to be, they eventually had to come south to the evil LA to get a record deal." And this included the Grateful Dead and Janis Joplin. They had done so, and now it was Charlie's turn. Wannabe musicians flocked to Sunset Boulevard. At any given time, a hippie with a guitar on his back might bump into Johnny Rivers, David Crosby, The Doors, or the Mothers of Invention, the Frank Zappa band. The Troubadour and Whiskey A Go-Go were big clubs to hear great music. One of the main differences in the LA bands is that they ignored social movements and anti-war sentiments, much to the dismay of outspoken Frank Zappa. Charlie blew into LA on the Santa Ana winds, which, if you don't know, are extremely strong and dry, and they downslope into the southern coastal part of California. So it's kind of funny that Charlie kind of blew in with these winds.
It is.
Because he's like his own little force of nature.
Yeah, he's just this little dry wind that's going to like make you need more moisturizer, you know?
I could really get into the music scene because, I mean, there's a lot going on as far as the music scene in LA. And of course, Charlie really wants to be part of this, but I'm not going to dive too much into that. I am going to give you some background on what was happening though. So Charlie was easily able to get in touch with Gary Stromberg at Universal Studios. If you remember, his prison friend Phil Kaufman had given him the guy's name and said you should go see him in LA. So Charlie finally calls the guy up and is easily able to get like a meeting with this guy, almost like an audition, right? Charlie cleans up for the meeting. He showers. He puts on fresh, clean clothes, which was a big deal for Charlie.
So he really wants, he's really into this.
He's
he wants
trying to impress.
Right.
But he shows up to the meeting barefoot because he's still Charlie. He was given a 3-hour studio session, which turned out to be a disaster. Stromberg suggested that Charlie work some more on his songs and try again. Yet Stromberg was fascinated by Charlie and the girls and even spent a few days hanging out with them. People were like blown away that this guy Charlie has this harem of young women who hang on his every word and are willing to do anything he asks of them. So Stromberg's not the only guy we'll encounter in this story who's just sort of like, wow, I need to spend time with y'all because this is such a crazy setup.
Right. How is this guy pulling this off, basically?
Charlie reached out to his friend Bobby Beausoleil, who was hanging out in Topanga Canyon. Charlie ended up at a place they called the Staircase House, which I looked into it and I couldn't find the homeowner's name exactly. And from what I understand, it doesn't even exist anymore. But it was kind of like this funky house, kind of cool house that was used as a crash pad for various musicians, artists. At one point, it was like a heroin den.
Nice.
So people would just kind of show up and stay there. And I guess the owner at the time liked to have strange and unusual and unique folks stay over as house guests. So somehow Charlie ends up there through Bobby Beausoleil. And in exchange for cleaning the place, the family was allowed to crash there. Beausoleil hung out with Manson, but he didn't want to hit the road with the family or become a full-time recruit. Manson was introduced to Gary Hinman, which we'll get to him later. And Bobby Beausoleil, I mean, he was a really good-looking guy. I mean, he was very handsome. Pretty egotistical. I mean, he's a musician. He knows he's hot, and talented, so he's kind of a ladies' man. All the girls were all over him, and Charlie didn't like this because he didn't want the girls exposed to outside influences like Bobby Beausoleil. And fearing they might leave him, he tells the group they're leaving.
Yeah.
He doesn't want them to get too comfortable, and he doesn't want them lusting over Bobby and maybe deciding that they want to stay back with him or something.
Well, yeah, he just simply doesn't want any competition. And if he's telling the girls, hey, go have sex with that guy so maybe we can get him to join our group, that's okay because that's him giving, telling them to do it.
But he knows Beausoleil's like not into it.
Right. And he can see, I'm sure he's a man, he can see that the girls are like, ooh, about this really handsome, cool guy.
Exactly.
So, yeah, Charlie's not going to stand for that.
No, so he immediately took the group out to the Mojave Desert. Then they took the bus to Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And it's there that Susan Atkins gets pregnant. But not by Charlie. It's by some random dude in Texas. And she ends up naming her baby some very strange name. Like Zizo Zuzeza or something.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's almost like she had a baby with Elon Musk.
Yeah, it's just really strange. But anyway, life on the road was difficult. Charlie was interested in creating some sort of commune because it was really hard to be bussing around. The bus would break down constantly. No one had jobs. They had to panhandle, find money for gas and food. They would get ran out of towns and cities because people didn't want these hippies on this bus crashing in their towns.
Well, no. I mean, you take, especially in the smaller communities, this bus rolls into town with this guy and, however many, 5 or 6 girls at this point. And I don't know, is there any dudes or is it basically him and the girls?
I mean, right now it's basically Charlie with the girls.
Yeah, but they're still going to stand out at the local diner, downtown. People are going to see them. And they're not going to want any part of that.
Yeah, they're all barefoot and tripping, and half of them are pregnant,
begging for money.
Exactly.
I mean,
stanking.
I'm sure it's a bit of a scene.
Stanking in the desert heat. I mean,
stanky jungles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Charlie was really interested in like a commune type of situation, and he looked to Wavy Gravy, a very famous figure of the 60s hippie subculture movement. There's even an ice cream.
Yeah, there's a Ben and Jerry's flavor dedicated to him.
Wavy Gravy, yeah. He was like a deadhead and what have you. So he had what they called the Hog Farm in Los Angeles, and it was a commune. Charlie liked the idea of a stable place for the family. So while he was visiting the hog farm, Charlie met 14-year-old Diane Lake. And with her parents' blessing, the girl was allowed to go with Charlie and join his family.
Okay.
Her parents had given up all their possessions to move to California and become part of this commune.
Oh, okay. So they're already in the spirit of the hippie life, the non-conventional, blah, blah, yah,
exactly.
Okay.
So they were just kind of like, sure, take our daughter.
Yeah, bring her back. If she comes back and it's meant to be, man.
Kind of.
What the fuck?
In some ways, I'm like, maybe they were onto something.
Just send her off with this weird guy.
There are times I feel like, can I just send my daughter off to a commune to like pick flowers or something?
They won't leave.
That's true. Okay. So by December, Charlie was back in Topanga, angling for new music prospects. In Topanga Canyon, there were many artists living in the area, like Stephen Sills, Neil Young, and Linda Ronstadt. Many of the musicians were accustomed to these young wannabe rock stars, slipping them a demo tape, or maybe stopping them on the street and trying to play a song for them. Like, hey, I got my guitar, you got to hear this jam I wrote, whatever. But Charlie was way pushier than any of the others. He was kicked out of a band rehearsal, the band Spirit, with members shouting at him, "You got bad karma, man."
So he would just kind of worm his way into places or hang out with some people
Yes.
and then be like, hey, wait a minute. And then just be all like it's all about him or something. They're just like, what the fuck, dude?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So they kicked him out, and I thought that was pretty funny. You got bad karma, man. And one of the producers around the music scene was a guy named David Briggs. And he later said that at one point he threatened to shoot Charlie if he ever saw him again because Charlie was so obnoxious and annoying. I mean, everybody hates Charlie.
Well, it seems like he just comes on really strong.
He does.
And he's probably, as soon as you don't do exactly what he wants or thinks you should, I'm sure he kind of gets, I mean, we've all seen him in kind of an agitated state. It's a lot, you know what I mean?
He definitely rubs people the wrong way. Men were recruited based on their skills, especially mechanical skills, because Charlie was always trading. I don't know, like how he was able to do this, but it's Charlie.
It's just all about that talk,
he's
man.
fucking able to do the damn thing. He would trade for a car, a dune buggy, a motorcycle, and of course the bus was always breaking down. He had an 18-year-old guy named Paul Watkins that was probably the most successful recruiter that Charlie had. Though Charlie mostly treated the men with indifference, his real focus was on breaking down the women so they would submit to him. So he was much more lenient on like the guys he allowed into the family, but when it came to the women, he was really strict with this vetting process. They had to meet like certain criteria.
I'm like, it says here your credit score is a 680. Do you think you can bring that up in the next 3 months if you want to be part of the family?
So he has started to recruit some men. And it was like if they could fix a car, work on motorcycles, something like that. Then Charlie was like, oh, yeah, man, we need you. We need a guy like you. Well, they would need a guy like you, Dylan.
Well, I mean, if they need any fences done or
some manual labor.
me to monitor their stock flows if they happen to own a paper making process.
They need like a good chemical operator or something.
Yeah, maybe. Because I usually don't forget. You know, that's all I can say.
One of the wealthy young women was Dee Dee Lansbury, daughter of actress or actor Angela Lansbury. You may know her from Murder, She Wrote.
Now, I must say, I did not know this tidbit when you were telling me earlier.
So while hanging out in LA, somehow Charlie makes young Dee Dee's acquaintance. Dee Dee had begun experimenting with drugs like marijuana and heroin. And she and Charlie kind of immediately hit it off. There were even days that Manson picked her up from school.
Oh, my God.
Dee Dee bought Manson and his followers new clothes, auto parts, and she was using her mother's credit cards to do so. Eventually, Angela cut her off because she was spending $800, $1,000 a week, which even in the 1960s was a shit ton of money, right?
Well, shit, nowadays that's a lot of money, let's be honest.
Yeah, but back then that was a lot of money. Eventually, Angela became so worried about this bad crowd her daughter was running with that she ended up moving her family to Ireland. And her Malibu mansion was mysteriously burned down in 1970.
Wow. Damn.
Yeah. And a lot of people think perhaps it was some of the Manson family who burned down her house.
Well, I mean, it would make sense.
By early 1968, Manson had 20 members of this family. Everyone was given new names or nicknames, which would later make it harder for law enforcement and media to keep track of like who was who. I believe Susan Atkins was called Sadie Mae. We have a Yeller. There's Gypsy, Tex, Squeaky. Everybody's got a nickname, Dylan.
Well, that's gonna, unless you know that group and know who's what, you're not gonna know exactly who's doing what or talking to who. So yeah, I could see that causing problems.
The family would scrounge trash bins for food. Charlie taught them to dumpster dive behind grocery stores. And they would find like a shit ton of food and like good stuff. I mean, they were like, yeah, we were dumpster diving, but we ate well. Like we would go behind a Ralph's grocery store and come out with stuff to make like huge salads, like fresh fruit and vegetables, fresh bread. So, they weren't like starving. They were doing okay. Sometimes the women would dress up in conservative clothing and go into grocery stores claiming they were scout leaders and ask for snack donations.
Oh, nice.
The women would also volunteer to work at the farmer's market, and at the end of the day, they were able to take home whatever leftover fruits and vegetables and things that didn't sell typically. If a girl said, "I want some fruit," Charlie would make it out like it was their idea by saying, "Oh, great idea. You want to work the farmer's market this weekend. That is so excellent. You are so smart. Thank you for that idea."
Nice.
And then the girl would be like, yeah, I'll go get us some fruit.
Yeah, well, and then we all get to have fruit.
Yes, exactly.
Jeez Louise.
Charlie was regularly dosing the group with LSD, always taking a lesser dose himself or sometimes none at all so that he could be in control of the trip. He used the opportunity to preach his messages of peace and love, sometimes calling himself Jesus Christ. And at certain points, he even would like reenact the crucifixion while everybody was tripping balls.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
He's also encouraging group sex among the family. At times, he assigned partners, but he definitely did not allow for anyone to have a relationship among the group. And if he thought a man and woman were spending too much time together, he would split them up. Because you were not allowed to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend in the family.
Well, no, he can't allow anyone to form a bond with someone else besides him.
And from what I understand, so there's like all these orgies and whatnot, and he would pair everyone up, but he never really like made the girls do like girl on girl or anything like that. He was totally like, that's not cool. Which I guess I was just like, oh, it's an orgy. But apparently he was like, it has to be a heterosexual orgy.
Yeah, I don't think orgies work like that.
Well, it does in Charlie's world, okay? So Phil Kaufman, Charlie's prison buddy, had been released and moved to Los Angeles. He was staying with a friend named Harold True, who lived next door to the La Bianca household. And we'll get to that later. Though Kaufman enjoyed hanging out with Charlie Manson, specifically the harem of sexually available young women, he had no interest in being a full-fledged family member. After about 5 weeks of hanging around, Charlie kicked him out and told Phil Kaufman, quote, "You're too smart to be here, man."
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Phil Kaufman would later say anytime Charlie was trying to sell him on like this peace and love and you got to give up all your possessions, man, and join us, that Phil Kaufman would be like, save it for someone else. I'm never going to, no, Charlie, I'm not going to do that. And so when Charlie grew bored of this, was like, get out, man. Can't be in the club, man. In 1968, just like in 67, there were race riots. Then you had the RFK assassination, and Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. And Charlie used these events to drive home how safe his family was from the outside world. Again, Charlie never spoke about race with the women, but with the men, Charlie would freely spout his racist views. And I thought this was kind of interesting, how he sort of shielded the women from these negative thoughts. And so later when people say, Charlie was racist, the women are like, what are you talking about? He's full of peace and love.
Well, see, I always wondered if he was truly racist or if that was just some shit they thought up that would sound cool or, whatever. So I guess he really did have these thoughts, right?
He did.
Okay.
Charlie recruited a young woman named Sandy Good to join the family. She had a stipend of $200 a month that her father sent. Apparently her father was kind of a well-to-do guy, I think a stockbroker. Good would move with the family to their new home at Spawn Ranch in the mountains west of Chatsworth. So in April of 1968, Mary Bruner gave birth at home to a son she named Valentine Michael Manson. But they all called him Pooh Bear.
Makes total sense.
Charlie felt that birth parents would ruin a child, so his philosophy was that everyone had equal share in raising the children, and he did not allow, the birth parents to spend a lot of time, alone rearing their child.
Well, I would like to have had help rearing mine, so this may be a philosophy of Charles that I could sign on to.
The family left LA and they loaded the bus searching for campsites. So most communities were not welcoming to this growing family. Again, they thought they were dirty. They dumped trash on the sidewalks. They ran around barefoot. They were fucked up on drugs, whatnot. The family ended up settling on Spahn Ranch, which was owned by a blind octogenarian named George Spahn, who had once had a thriving location for Western movies. The ranch made money by offering horseback riding and consisted of these like makeshift buildings used for saloons and such. They were like movie prop buildings.
Whoa. Does octogenarian mean someone who's in their 80s?
Yes.
Holy shit. I'm good. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So in exchange for being allowed to live at the ranch, Charlie put the group to work. Lynn was given the task of living with George Spahn, the 80-something-year-old blind man, and acting as his housekeeper. She was also told to have sex with him whenever he wanted.
Okay.
George liked pinching her butt, which caused her to squeal, and therefore he nicknamed her Squeaky.
Oh, that's cute.
Squeaky from.
That's cute.
In total, 35 people were living at the ranch. Charlie kept them on a very strict schedule at this time. They woke up early, they had breakfast, and then spent the rest of the day until sometime in the mid-afternoon working, cleaning out stables. Many of them cared for the horses, which was actually work Charlie enjoyed. He did like to be around animals. And if you remember back in West Virginia, he had worked at Wheeling Downs, the horse races, like taking care of the horses there.
Right.
They would lead these horseback trail rides for, various people who just show up. So, they were doing their best, I guess, to help out here. In the afternoons, they would have group sex and sometimes LSD sessions while Charlie preached. Then they typically ate a big family dinner together. And after dinner, this is when Charlie would preach some more, or they would have like sing-alongs and Charlie would play his music for them while the girls joined in and played their tambourines and such.
I bet this was a wild scene. I mean, really. I mean, you got Charles all crazy-eyed, looking a little crusty.
Hey, man, come on down here, man. I'll take a fun trip with you. Come on, man. What you doing? You want to go jive with me on the guitar, man?
All these girls, just doing whatever he tells them to do, and all this free love and just whatever stuff and drugs. It's very strange.
Squibbly-biddy-biddy-biddy-doo. Get over here, Squeaky, and suck this man's dick.
Wait.
Whoop-a-doop-boom, I'm going to play you a Beatles song.
Wait, was he scatting?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was like obsessed with the Beatles, by the way, and would play like the Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts album like so much that the rest of the family were just fucking over it because that's like all they were allowed to sing and listen to and shit. And
with all this good music happening around you during this era.
Charlie loved the fucking Beatles. So,
wow.
I mean, and members would say like after a while, it would just be like, oh God, not again.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other choices, Charles.
And then there was Barker Ranch. This was also Charlie's de facto headquarters out in Death Valley. However, it was uncomfortable temperatures. It was like really hot during the day and cold at night. And he had learned of this ranch from Catherine Gillies and sometimes occupied this property. Now, initially he had stayed, I guess, at Catherine's grandmother's ranch, and it was close to Barker Ranch, and they found out it was like sort of abandoned, so they moved on over to Barker. So he's kind of dividing his time between Spahn and Barker Ranch, and he's also got certain members of the family living at Spahn Ranch, and then other members he's assigned to stay at Barker Ranch. And of course, the people out at Barker were unhappy and miserable because it sucked.
Because you're in Death Valley?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's the hottest place recorded on Earth.
No, it was fucking miserable. It's out in the middle of nowhere. And at least at Spahn, you could be in LA pretty quickly, but not out in the, fucking Death Valley desert. People hated it there. Though some members were at Spahn, like I said, Charlie set up a few to stay at Barker. And Barker was good because it was more isolated from the outside world. But Spahn was closer to LA, where they needed to travel easily for panhandling, and so Charlie could pursue his music career. Right?
Okay.
So while at Spahn, Alan Rose from the Free Clinic visited and stayed with them for several weeks.
Yeah.
You mentioned him on the midweek episode.
Yeah.
Do Do you want to briefly touch on Alan Rose again?
Well, Alan Rose was actually Dr. David Smith's assistant, lab assistant.
They call him Jolly, right?
No.
That's not the same guy?
No, Jolly West was
A different person.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, with me talking, it's always going to be confusing. But no, Alan Rose was just the assistant there at the clinic, and they kept coming across the family, and like Heather's pointed out already, people are kind of fascinated by this whole dynamic of this little weird dude who talks, with all this hey man stuff, and with this, basically like a harem of girls with him who are devout, and pledged their allegiance to him. And Mr. Rose went and hung out with the family for weeks or even maybe a couple of months. It might have been upwards of 4 months actually, and just hung out with them and did the drugs and was involved in some of this group sex.
Right? Well, in September of 1970, Rose actually published a paper on the family in a medical journal about their use of psychedelics.
Yeah, and I really think that was his. I honestly think that was his intention, was to just observe them and doing all this in the way they were doing it.
Charlie, during this time, returned back to L.A., and he rented a place at Canoga Park because he's so desperate to get a record deal. So he's got half the family staying at Spawn. He's got people at Barker Ranch. He's kind of skipping and hopping back and forth between the two, but then up and decides he's going to rent a little place down in Canoga Park because he's going to be a rock star.
Yeah, so he's got everybody else living hand to mouth in these abandoned ranches for the most part. Spawn Ranch is not quite abandoned, but in these kind of dire straits and situations, and he's got a little cool pad downtown.
In 1967, the Beach Boys were probably the biggest band behind the Beatles. They'd had a hit with Good Vibrations, but as the 60s came to a close, the band struggled to stay relevant. No longer were youths interested in songs about surfing and having fun. Young people were embracing musicians who sang about social change or offered psychedelic sounds.
Yeah, I'd say that whole surf culture era was kind of left over from the 50s, wouldn't you?
It was.
Okay.
Brian Wilson had been the songwriter for the band, and he was struggling with his own issues of mental illness and drug abuse. He was estranged from his family and the band after they had released the Pet Sounds with the Good Vibrations and all that on it. He was kind of doing his own thing, doing lots and lots of drugs, just sort of left the band hanging. His brother Dennis Wilson saw the band was not aging well. In the shadow of Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. They'd actually played, I believe it was the Monterey Music Festival, and people came to see the Beach Boys because it's, the nostalgic Beach Boys. But he could tell when they were playing versus when these new artists were playing, it was not the same vibe and energy, So the band is struggling. They're struggling to stay relevant. They need to upgrade their sound. Everybody's kind of, just tired of the bullshit of being in this band and whatever. Members had begun following the Maharishi Yogi, who had also worked with the Beatles at some point. They even brought him, the Beach Boys, even brought this Maharishi Yoga on tour with them to open their shows, which did not bode well. To open a musical concert with a yogi trying to lead people into meditation and shit.
I would just be like, dude, what the hell's going on? I just want to hear some good music.
The band member Mike Love, he was really into this transcendental meditation and shit. So Dennis Wilson had wanted to write songs, but he felt he was never taken seriously as a songwriter, especially in the shadow of his brother Brian. Dennis also lived an excessive life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So in late spring of 1968, Dennis was driving down Sunset when he picked up two hitchhikers, Patricia Krenwinkel and Ella Jo Bailey, who would later be known as Yeller. So the women were taken to this log cabin / mansion off of Sunset Boulevard that Wilson rented. And the whole time they keep telling him, you've got to meet Charlie. You've got to meet our guy Charlie. I mean, they like smoke some pot, hang out, what have you. And it's not long after this meeting that one evening Wilson returns home to find the lights on and a school bus parked outside of his house.
Nice.
He is very shaken when a diminutive little guy walks toward him. Dennis Wilson asks, "Are you going to hurt me?" And Charlie said, "Do I look like I'm going to?" before dropping to his knees and kissing Dennis Wilson's feet.
Okay. That's not weird at all.
Thus began one of the most unusual friendships in rock and roll history. So we're going to dive deep into this Dennis Wilson relationship.
Well, a lot of people feel like this is a kind of a key character in the Manson story.
I mean, it really does, I think, set off a chain of events. Although Wilson didn't realize it, he had opened his home to Charles Manson and about 20 female companions who would come and go. Wilson was struck by Charlie. I mean, he was interesting and was also a musician. Plus, Manson supplied him with LSD and women who seemed to hang on Charlie's every word, and they were more than willing to satisfy any of Wilson's sexual desires. Wilson began calling him the Wizard.
Ooh.
And started introducing him to friends in the music industry, including Neil Young and a talent scout named Greg Jacobson. Neil Young thought Manson was an, quote, improvisational genius, even suggesting that Warner Brothers take a listen to him. And Jacobson was more interested in being seduced by teenager Ruth Ann Morehouse. So Jacobson apparently is like a married man and such, but he's like really into this teenage girl.
So if only Charlie could have struck a record deal, maybe had a one-hit wonder, fizzled out, went on, fade to black, maybe none of the other stuff would have happened. Do you think that's possible? Or do you think insanity was always going to exist around this man?
I think it's an interesting hypothetical to contemplate. But yeah, I think even if that had panned out, there would have ended up being some strange chaos.
One form of or another.
Follows Charlie.
Okay.
Yeah. Dennis decided to take Charlie to his company, Brother Records. This was a record label that like the Beach Boys had started up. The folks at Brother Records immediately disliked Charlie. He walked in acting like he owned the place. He was smelly. Behind his back, they called him Pigpen.
Oh my gosh.
The staff hated him. When he finally sat down to play, the session guy realized that Charlie only knew how to play a few chords and wasn't a real musician at all. He didn't really know how to play guitar. The session went very badly, and Charlie ended up pulling a knife on the studio engineer.
Okay.
Brother Records did not want to sign Charlie, and they turned down Dennis Wilson, which people are like, well, it's kind of like his company, right? But it didn't matter.
Yeah, well, if it's a real company, it's going to have its own structure and
Right.
stuff, and they're going
So
to.
despite the fact that Wilson like had a hand in this business, they were like, no, we're not giving your buddy a record deal.
No, and I find it funny that a real musician like Wilson and other people would say that, hey, this guy's got something. So I wonder what it is they saw about him if he really didn't even have the fundamentals down. If you went to actually go try to record something.
Probably just the showmanship of Charlie. I mean, let's be honest. He's a showman. He's like a LaVey or he's like a carnival barker, right? I mean, he commands attention. He's fucking weird. He'll talk your ear off, and he gets up there and plays, and he's real passionate about his music. So I could see where other passionate artists might be taken in by this guy.
Okay.
And honestly, I mean, I've listened to some of Charlie's songs. They're not that bad. But I think the overall consensus, and we'll get into this later, with these, professional record folks, was that he had a very dime a dozen sound. Like there were 10,000 other young, like hippie dudes playing acoustic guitar out on the street corners that looked and sounded just like Charlie.
Right, and then when you throw in being around Charlie and dealing with Charlie, it's just not going to work.
Well, and we'll get into this some more, but it seems like every time Charlie got into a professional recording studio or setting, he folded under pressure.
Right.
Like when he was in the safety of the ranch or the bus, and he was surrounded by his harem, these people who were super supportive of him, like Charlie could shine. But the minute he got in front of strangers or was sort of put on the spot, he choked. He really didn't have it. He was not a performer. He would just bite it and suck. So they did not want to sign him, and they turned Dennis Wilson down. And after this, the Brother Records executives ran a background check on Charlie, and they saw his extensive criminal record. But instead of being turned off by this, Dennis Wilson thought it was exciting. He was like, yeah, man, he told me he had gotten out of prison. Wow, he's kind of cool. Like, he's the real deal. Dennis Wilson. Okay, so now we have to talk about Terry Melcher. Big player in this story, right? Terry Melcher was Doris Day's son and a pretty successful music guy. By 22, he had already gone to work at Columbia Records, and he was a musician himself and had played in bands and like really knew his shit. And by 1966, he was working with the Byrds, the band. He made their song Mr. Tambourine Man a huge hit, and brought the regional band Paul Revere and the Raiders to pop stardom. So Terry Melcher is kind of like this guy in LA that like everything he touches turns to gold records.
Well, and he comes from a very famous mother. I'm not sure who his father is, but Doris Day was an icon, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this is a guy who grew up with tons of wealth and privilege, snotty rich kid from LA, you know. But people said he knew his shit. Like, he really was great at, like, recognizing talent. He knew what changes to make to songs. Like, we need to add, like, with the Mr. Tambourine Man, like, he had made a bunch of changes to the song for the band, and it ended up being, like, a huge hit.
Well, yeah, when you take someone who can produce like that and really make those minor changes that change everything about the song or the way it's received, and that's real talent.
Yeah, like Brian Ferry or something.
Yeah, even Kanye West, I didn't know, was a really big producer long before he broke into rap.
Yeah.
And I'm talking like for everybody in the rap game. They begged him for beats and to have him produce their song. And that really takes a lot of talent. And I think it takes someone who is really believes in themselves and can have a clear vision about something, even when everyone around them is telling them that's not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, Kanye, I think he's definitely like a musical genius. Do I like him personally? I think he's a little kooky, but...
Well, no, I seriously think the man has mental health issues that may or may not be being addressed.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, that's probably part of it.
But yeah, that's a huge talent in the business to be able to take someone like that. He might have talent or a sound or whatever, be able to tweak it to make it really catapult it into the stratosphere.
Yeah.
And it takes the producer to do that.
Absolutely. So Melcher is introduced to Manson, who tries desperately to impress him. But Melcher wasn't really interested in Charlie, but he did like the looks of Ruth Ann Morehouse.
Oh, hello.
Everybody loves Ruth Ann. But she's beautiful. She had like model good looks.
Okay.
You know? She's really super pretty. So it seems like every guy that is introduced to Ruth Ann is smitten by her. Melcher lived with his girlfriend, Candace Bergen, or Candy, as she was known back then, if we have any Murphy Brown fans.
I was going to say, I know that name.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she's like, kind of a young starlet at this point. And they lived together in a rented house on Cielo Drive. Now, he threw these lavish parties with live music and plenty of influential people. Yet Charlie could never swing an invitation to Melcher's house. Melcher didn't want Charlie at his home. Even when Charlie and the guy Jacobson gave Melcher a ride home once, he wouldn't invite them inside. And he would later tell Jacobson, like, I don't want that guy in my house.
That was a good call.
Yeah. Like, he really is, like, nah about Charlie. Just gets those bad vibes from him. Doesn't like him. Doesn't want to hang out with him. Doesn't want to give him the time of day.
You got bad vibes, man.
Even when his buddy Dennis Wilson and his friend Jacobson are like, this guy's cool, Melcher's like, no, he's not. So the other Beach Boys didn't really like Charlie either. They thought he was creepy. Mike Love wrote about his experience meeting Charlie at Dennis Wilson's house at a dinner party. He said everyone was naked and taking LSD after this dinner party and that they were participating in an orgy, and it was just too much for Mike Love. He excused himself to go take a shower. And at some point, Manson burst into the bathroom on him and scolded him for leaving the orgy.
Wow. What a great cocktail party story after the fact, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Still, Dennis Wilson believed in Manson's musical talent, and during this time, Charlie wrote the song Cease to Exist, and finally persuaded Jacobson to book him a recording session at a small studio in Van Nuys. The recording was average at best. Wilson passed a copy of this recording to John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas, but Phillips passed on the song, wasn't really into it. But more importantly, he passed on Charlie. Because maybe it wasn't even so much that he didn't like the song, but he just was like, he didn't like Charlie.
See, that's the thing with these people. Like I said before, even if there was a kernel of, hey, because, I mean, that's happened before. They've heard average stuff, but they say, hey, wait, if we take this and change it like this or get this person to perform it, this can be a hit. It's just Charlie is
and I actually like this song "Cease to Exist" by Charlie.
Right.
I think it's not a bad song.
But it's Charlie that turns people off.
Charlie that turns people off. I mean, it's interesting because people who meet him either are really captivated by him or they fucking hate him. It's like there's no in between.
Or they're like, at first he's like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool and weird, but then he kind of overstays his welcome. Or they quickly tire of him.
I don't know. I think it's kind of
one or the other.
It's a very polarized feeling about Charlie. People either really are captivated and like him, or they dislike him from Jump Street. So one day, Dennis Wilson was hitchhiking, which is strange to me because he's got like Ferraris and shit.
I guess he's living the life.
Well, apparently all of these rock stars would just like hitchhike in LA and stuff. It was not uncommon to pick up like Jim Morrison.
What the fuck?
Drunk on Sunset Boulevard or something.
That would be so cool.
So one day Dennis Wilson's hitchhiking when a young man named Charles Watson picks him up. And we'll know him as Tex.
Oh my gosh.
When Tex arrives at Wilson's house, he is blown over by these young women running around naked, partying, smoking weed, just chilling.
Wait a second. So
Yeah.
Tex's introduction to the Charlie and the family is because he picked up Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys hitchhiking.
Yes.
What the fuck?
Yep.
Okay.
And Tex was like kind of the all-American boy. He had come from Texas, had been a football player. I believe he dropped out of high school, though, and like kind of kicked around working in, grocery stores and different types of jobs. And then he'd come to LA. But he was, a pretty good-looking guy, athletic, smart, seemed well-rounded, right? And he is just like, whoa, because here's all these fine young things running around half naked and more than willing to have sex with him.
Nice.
Like, hey, stranger, you want to come in here? I'll give you a blowjob. And he's like, yes.
You want some LSD and some punani?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's like sold like it's the Grundy County auction. Tex became an immediate recruit for Charlie. And Tex was pretty mechanical and hard worker. Everything that came out of Charlie's mouth, he's just eating it up with a spoon. And it doesn't hurt that Charlie's like, here, have some free drugs. Yeah. So during this time, Charlie has sent Susan Atkins and a few of the other women up north to find more permanent housing for the family. In a town called Philo, the followers rented a house. But the cops were called out, and Susan, Patricia Krenwinkel, Yeller, and Pooh Bear were taken into custody. They're often nicknamed the Witches of Mendocino, this group of women. But, the cops were calling them because they're partying and drugs and, doing Manson girl things, I guess.
Yeah, it's
right.
a very particular type of thing.
So who knows what that means. But the child was sent to foster care after they were apprehended. Charlie, who was still trying to work over Dennis Wilson for a record deal, asked his friend Bobby Beausoleil to travel up north and check out this arrest situation. Beausoleil agreed, and with him were two young women, Catherine Shares, who would become known as Gypsy, and a young lady named Leslie Van Houten. and she's a pretty popular Manson girl. And my favorite director, John Waters, is like her friend, of course. So when Beausoleil returned to Spawn Ranch, Charlie met him there to learn there was not much that could be done to get the women out of jail or to fetch Pooh Bear from foster care. Van Houten, who had experimented with some other communes, initially wasn't interested in going to Spawn Ranch. She had learned from past experiences that the way the commune typically worked is that the other women there were kind of catty and would mistreat you, and especially if there was some leader who was sexually involved with multiple women, that the new girl got treated like shit because people thought, oh, she's going to try to take our man.
Oh, so she's already been through these types of
And
situations.
she's probably like the smartest of these women. I mean, she's very intelligent, and if you listen to interviews with her, she's well spoken. I mean, she's a smart lady. And so she's kind of like about meeting these people and the family, and Beausoleil's kind of talking them up, and she's like, yeah, I'm not really interested in going there, and I don't think I'd want to be part of this. But once she gets there, she meets Charlie and decides to stay. And Charlie initially thought that Leslie was too smart and too beautiful to be part of this group.
Hey, man, you think too critically to be here, man, okay? You ask too many questions, and you say things like, no, and I don't think so, okay, man? That just doesn't work, man.
So yeah, at first he's like, she's too smart, too pretty to be part of this group. But she seemed dedicated to being part of a commune and being part of a, like a big family type of situation. So he let it slide, thinking, okay, well, I can use her for something, I'm sure. By now, Dennis Wilson was growing tired of Charlie's antics. Summer was ending, and Wilson had spent about $100,000 on food, medical bills, clothing, and damages to his property.
Jesus.
Like, for example, one of Charlie's guys, this dude they called Clem or Scramblehead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes total sense.
He had wrecked Wilson's Ferrari. Dennis Wilson kept sending these food and medical bills to Brother Records to get paid. And the record company's like, why are we paying for your friends' followers?
Yeah.
So yeah, in total it was about $100,000.
I can't believe it took him this long, honestly. Dennis Wilson, to tire of this.
He thought offering Charlie one last chance to record would maybe ease this breakup with him because Wilson's over it and just wants to be done.
So, but Wilson's been, I think it's partly about the drugs and the scene and all the chicks and this whole thing. So he's kind of just been paying the play at this point.
Right.
And he's kind of over it now.
Yes. He ends up arranging a recording session at Brian Wilson's house because they have a recording studio set up there. And that's where, like, the Beach Boys had been recording, I guess, their latest work. Because at this point, Brian's only recording in his pajamas and doing drugs and having depression issues and just sort of generally being odd. So anyway, he takes him over there, and a guy named Stephen Despar is going to record the session. Apparently, Charlie brought a bunch of women with him. They kept using the bathroom, and afterwards, Brian Wilson's wife was like, I have to clean and bleach all of the bathrooms because these people were so gross.
Oh, my God.
Like, she was just like, did not want these people in her house and thought they were disgusting and nasty. Yeah. Charlie was very uncooperative during the session. He was egotistical and botched the record session again. He wouldn't listen to directions, and he couldn't play the guitar. It was, once again, a failure. This guy, Despar, was just like, this fucking dude, right? Dennis took the song Cease to Exist to the Beach Boys, hoping maybe the song could work on their new album, which is going to be called 2020. Avoiding confrontation, Wilson moved out of his rented home with the lease set to expire and let his landlord formally evict the family. Wilson moved up the Pacific Coast Highway to a secret house, and he told people, like, do not tell Charlie where I live.
So it didn't work out really to kind of ease Charlie out of the picture. They were just like, whatever, and still had to literally be evicted from his home.
Yes.
Okay, which he abandoned to get away from them.
Yeah, he just, like, packed up.
Oh, my God.
But the craziest thing, man, he, like, packed up only a few possessions and like snuck out of his own house and moved into this other place and just left all of the rest of his shit behind because he
Jeez.
just was like trying to get away from Charlie quietly. So Charlie and the remaining family members moved back to Barker Ranch and then later to Spawn. Now, after this, the men rarely saw one another, though Wilson did inform Manson in November that one of Charlie's songs would be on the album 2020. What Manson didn't know was the song had been recorded as Never Learn Not to Love instead of Cease to Exist. And it was a B-side to their Bluebirds Over the Mountain, which was released in December of '68, with Dennis Wilson as the sole writing credit.
Wow. So he actually used one of Charlie's songs. The Beach Boys performed it, and they put it on an album.
But Wilson did rewrite the song a
Did
bit.
he rearrange it to a degree?
To a degree, yes. I mean, if you listen to Cease to Exist, the Charles Manson version, and then you listen to Never Learn Not to Love, you can see very clearly the similarities in these songs, but they are also different, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But it's like Wilson took this idea, the beat, the idea of the song, and then kind of turned it into his own.
Which is wrong,
Yeah.
in my opinion, but I mean, on a different level of wrong of some of the stuff Charlie's doing, obviously, but it's a shitty thing to do.
Well, it seemed like in some way Wilson thought this song was like, would help him repay the fucking huge amount of money he had spent on Charlie over the summer.
Okay.
I mean, that kind of seemed to be his attitude. But I think also the Beach Boys, they didn't like Charlie, and there was no way they were going to give him any kind of writing credit on their album.
Well, no, and it also opens you up to royalties and payments and things like that.
Well,
and,
because
and
Brian hates him. Mike Love's not feeling him. I mean, Dennis is really the only guy in the band that's kind of like, okay, Charlie. But yeah, I mean, they don't want to share money with Charlie, and they don't want to give him fucking writing credit. So as you can imagine, Charlie was furious to not only learn that he'd got no writing credits on this song, but that Wilson had changed the lyrics, because initially Charlie had told him, like, never change the lyrics to the song.
right.
You can never change the lyrics to the song. Also, the song wasn't even good enough as a B-side and tanked on the charts. So Charlie felt Terry Melcher was like his last chance at stardom. But this has to be kind of a kick in the face to Charlie, because he's like, okay, my song wasn't even good enough to be on the album as was. They release it as a B-side, and the track tanks. I think it charts at like in the low 60s or something. So he's kind of realizing at this point, like, despite his huge fucking ego, like, maybe I'm really not that good.
Well, I could see in his mind, if he hadn't have changed the song and he had left it the way I originally did it, it would have done better.
Maybe.
I could see that working in Charles' head too.
So then Charlie latches on to the thought that Terry Melcher is going to be his savior from this madness. When the Beatles released the White Album, Charlie was obsessed. He plays it over and over again, and in particular likes the 2 Revolution songs on the album, Helter Skelter, Piggies, and Blackbird. They all spoke to Charlie about an impending apocalypse. He begins preaching apocalyptic revelations to the family. There was going to be a huge uprising, and this is according to Charlie's theories of what was going to happen. He told his family that the black folks were going to rise up and going to kill all the white people.
They're going to rise up, man.
Yeah, and they're going to kill all the white people, man. And Charlie and his family, they were going to hunker down in the desert, and soon they would emerge, and they would be asked to run the world because black people lacked skills to run the world. But Charlie and his family had the skills to take over and run shit, and then all would be well.
This is not right. This is not true.
It's
This
not?
isn't true. Is this true?
Yes!
So he thought they were going to hide in Death Valley
Yeah.
till all the rest of the white people have been killed by the uprising black people.
Yes.
And now they're going to realize they really don't have the skills to actually make anything work. So they're going to turn to Charlie and the family for guidance because they're the only white people left that have the skills.
And then Charlie's going to be running the jewels.
Jesus Christ.
I mean-
What the fuck? Dude, even if I was 4 hits in on some of the most primo pure acid, I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? You know?
It'd be like that time you were pointing to the pillow.
Yeah.
And I was like, what are you talking about, man?
Kind of. The pillow was talking to me. But the point is, that just is such a load of bullshit. And I get grooming and I get brainwashing and all that stuff. Oh, my God. And you know, it's funny. Charlie's living hand to mouth. Of course, they've been, mooching off of Dennis Wilson at this point for a minute. But he's always got just a primo pure acid, right?
Yes.
It's funny how that works.
How does that happen?
I don't know.
Charlie would return once again to L.A. and try to contact Terry Melcher. He sent word with Jacobson, Wilson, and others, but Melcher was nowhere to be found. So at this time, Terry's stepfather had died, and Melcher was trying to help his mother, Doris Day, straighten out her financial affairs. Day had realized that her husband had spent all of her money. A bunch of bad investments, squandered a fortune away. So Melcher moves from his Cielo Drive house into her beach home, trying to get everything under control and in order. Melcher stopped going out partying. He kind of stepped away from the scene, the nightlife, and Charlie couldn't find him. When he would ask about Melcher, people were like, man, we haven't seen him for days, haven't heard from him. Like, he's sort of just fallen off the planet. Then the Cielo Drive landlord needed to find someone who could afford the $1,200 a month rental. And that's when Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate, the newlyweds, move in. They were some of the only folks around who needed a rental and could afford this $1,200 a month house.
Well, that's a lot back in the late 60s.
Totally was. I was thinking about what that payment would be like today.
I can't remember what it is. That would have to be upwards of like $3,500 or something like that nowadays.
You think so? I was thinking maybe more like $8,000-$9,000.
I can't remember what the rate of exchange or inflation is, but either way, it's a lot. It's not for your everyday, ordinary person to afford something like that.
Right. So George Spahn is growing tired of Manson's family and said, quote, he didn't want the long-haireds hanging around anymore. Squeaky was tasked with trying to change George's mind, and Manson also told her to get George to change his will and leave the ranch to Squeaky.
So in all this time that Charlie's been and the family's been splitting their time between there and was it Bunker Hill?
What is it, Chili?
No,
Is that a hot dog chili?
Death Valley.
Barker Ranch.
Barker Ranch. And hanging out in town with Dennis Wilson, people like that.
And he had rented that one little house for a while,
Right.
but of course, Charlie's not going to pay rent.
So the old man at a Spahn Ranch I'm sure, had already grown tired of their antics.
Well, they're
and all
in and
the
out
people.
all the time. Here's Charlie, and then he flies out, and then it's like right back in, and yeah.
Comes in like he owns the place every time, I'm sure. So he just don't want anything to do with them anymore.
Yeah, he's grown pretty tired of
He
their
doesn't mind
shit.
Squeaky hanging around, I'm sure, maybe. But he doesn't want the rest of them there, right?
No. Manson basically shows up at Spahn Ranch, though, and tells George, we're living here, fucking deal with it. And kind of like threatens the old man, intimidates him into basically, he kind of just wilts and allows them to stay there. He's like, he feels like there's not really much he can do. Manson knows they need to make money, so he teams up with a biker gang called the Straight Satans to make drug deals.
Okay. Oh my
The
gosh.
Straight Satans, is this opposed to like the gay Satans or
No.
like the pansexual Satans?
No, they were in direct opposition to the Crooked Devils, okay?
Oh, okay.
The Straight Satans. Yeah.
Okay. The club treasurer, Danny DiCarlo, he spends a lot of time at Spahn and is like hanging around with them. I also thought it was kind of funny that when Charlie comes back and is trying to make money, he like opens a bar on the ranch and like all the bikers are coming out there. And that's another thing. George Spahn is like over it because he's got all these fucking bikers like racing around his property with Harleys, and they're bringing like the Hell's Angels with them, and everybody's like raising hell and these big fucking bonfires and
What the fuck, dude?
just throwing down.
Like, does the beer truck come out there and supply the bar?
Well, eventually the state, they do like come in and like ticket them and shit. And George Spahn had to pay, I think, a $1,500 ticket for serving like illegal alcohol without a license.
Oh my God.
And he was pretty fucking mad about that.
Yeah, I can't believe Charlie didn't go through the proper authorities for his liquor by the drink
Apply
sales.
for his liquor license.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, there's so much. We don't have time to get into all the details, but I mean, there's a lot going on here. So Charlie's like, hey, we got to start selling some drugs. We need to make some money. The bikers have access to mescaline. And they want, and cocaine and like all this shit. And so they start trying to like coordinate. We're going to sell some drugs, man. But along with these, hey, we're going to start doing these drug deals, they also bring with them other drugs. And Charlie is losing control over what the followers are using because he had pretty strict rules about like they could use LSD, but like nothing else.
No, it's like pot and LSD.
Yeah. And these guys are bringing like the mescaline and heroin and pills.
Amphetamines.
Speed. Yeah. Crank, whatever. And Charlie's like, does not want people on speed hopping around the ranch.
No, he basically just wants them to take something psychedelic like LSD that will make them kind of immerse themselves and listen to his bullshit for hours on end.
Right. But Tex and some of the others are hiding drug stashes and using behind Charlie's back. So this is going to kind of create some bullshit. One day, Charlie visits the Cielo Drive address and learns that Terry Melcher has moved out. There's a 19-year-old named William Garrettson that had been hired by the landlord as a house sitter and was staying in the guest house. Roman and Sharon Polanski were leaving the next day to travel to Europe for a film. And Charlie goes and, he runs into the landlord who's also leaving with Roman and Sharon to go on this, European trip to make a film.
Okay.
Yeah. I can't remember the landlord's name. But anyway, the landlord basically, he's out in the guest house. There's people packing and whatever. And then Charlie goes to the main house and they're like, oh, you need to go see whoever at the guest house. And that guy explains to them, Terry Melcher doesn't live here anymore. New people live here and we're heading out. So you need to go on. You need to get on somewhere. Well, later Sharon Tate asks, did you send that creepy guy away? She immediately did not like the looks of Charlie.
So basically, he shooed Charles Manson away.
Yeah, pretty much. In April, Sharon had let her friends Wojtek Frykowski and an heiress, Abigail Folger, move into the property because she felt better knowing there would be more people there while she was gone. So she was going to let her friends stay there, and then they had this kid kind of acting as a house sitter, caretaker, and she kind of felt the more the merrier, and the better off we'll be, our stuff will be safe, and we won't have to worry, being gone or whatever. It was on April 19th that Spawn Ranch was raided by law enforcement because there were reports that the family had stolen dune buggies, and they had. So we got law enforcement out there. Finally, it was May 18th when Terry Melcher agreed to come to the ranch and listen to Charlie's audition. Charlie was excited and spent the day making sure everything was perfect. We got to have all this desert dust piles swept up, okay?
Y'all get that sand out of here, goddammit.
Yeah.
And somebody turn that sun down. I want it just right.
Exactly. Can you make sure them rattlesnakes don't come around?
Okay.
Right. Yet, Melcher was not at all impressed with Charlie's songs or his guitar playing. He's sitting around. Charlie's playing his guitar, singing, and the girls are singing the chorus and dancing their weird, wacky, wavy arm hippie dances. And somebody's playing a tambourine and someone's got a triangle, like a cowbell. Yeah, exactly.
Hey, we need more of that, buddy.
Exactly.
We need more of that right there.
So Melcher's just what the, yeah, he's not at all impressed. But he does feel bad that the family got most of their food from dumpster diving, which Charlie had explained this to him before they had sat down to play music, because he had always grown up with, full cabinets and wealth and privilege and the son of a famous movie star. He felt really bad that all of these people and these kids are eating trash, basically. So he handed Charlie $50, which was all the money he had on him, and told him he might come back with a session guitarist who could possibly be interested in working with Charlie. It was obvious that Melcher was passing on Charlie, and when Melcher did return with a session guitarist, it was a guy who traveled around in a van and played session guitar and sometimes had like recording equipment in his van that he would set up in someone's house.
Okay.
And would make these little sort of indie records that didn't sell very much or make a lot of money, but it was his shtick. So Melcher does bring this guy back, and the family dosed the guy up on LSD and overdosed the guy, and he had to be taken to the hospital.
Oh my God, dude.
So
you know,
it pretty much ruined Charlie's chances of like recording with this dude.
So he actually came back with this guy, whoever he is, but hey, he's got equipment and know-how and can play the guitar. So that might help Charlie out a little bit if you don't have to worry about the 3 chords on the guitar. But they fuck it up. Like, just keep the drugs put up until at least you get done trying to make this thing you've been dying to do, man. It's crazy.
It's after this, Charlie tries to pass his tapes off to Cass Elliot of the Mamas and Papas. She's like, no thanks. And Bobby Beausoleil tried to pitch Manson to a very disinterested Frank Zappa. Manson had to finally come to terms with the fact he was never going to become a rock star.
He's had more chances than most people ever get as far as people with actual influence pitching him to friends of theirs in the business.
Like really talented people that never
It's
get
been
a record deal. And then you've got Manson.
4 or 5 separate recording, possibilities or sessions, hours long. And and all these people with influence, speaking good of him, like, wow, you should check this guy out. I mean, at what point do you realize it's just not going to happen for you?
Well, probably because they're speaking good of him.
Yeah. Boy, speaking well of them?
Yeah.
How do you say that? I don't think well goes where good does.
Okay.
Personally.
You just tickled me.
I'm doing good.
You're like the Charles Manson of the vocabulary world.
Hey, man, don't you be trying to get out of my brain, man.
Hey, man, you run up on me here with your big words, man. Okay, so Gary Hinman, we got to talk about him, right? He's the next part of our story. He was born in Colorado in 1934. He had graduated with a chemistry degree, but wanted to get a doctorate in sociology at UCLA. A part-time musician himself, Hinman was known around Topanga Canyon as a very kind, generous man who often let anyone in need use his house as a bit of a crash pad, couch surf. You get the idea. Bobby Beausoleil, a Manson associate if you recall, had stayed at Hinman's home on various occasions. Hinman had worked at a music store teaching lessons in bagpipes, piano, trombone, and the drums. That's a very assorted collection of musical instruments.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Not only is he an expert bagpipe player, but he also can get down on the trombone. Just make sure it's not a rusty one.
That's true.
Sometime in 1968, Gary had become interested in Buddhism and was planning a trip to Japan for a pilgrimage. And in order to fund this, he had begun dealing drugs on the side, namely like mescaline. Around this time, which I don't know a lot about mescaline, do you?
If I'm not mistaken, it's derived from a cactus.
Is it?
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, they actually sell that breed of cactus legally here in America. I have not looked any of this up. I've not read anything about it. You prepare it a certain way.
That sounds like a damn lie. Anywho, we all know you're full of shit. So around this time, one of Manson's followers, the guy Clem, or Scramblehead, as they called him.
That nickname's awesome.
He had been charged. Well, they called him that because they viewed him as being very, very, very dumb. Like that he may have some like cognitive issues.
Oh.
But then other people thought maybe he was just playing dumb as sort of a manipulation type of thing.
Oh.
But I don't know. Well, he had actually gotten arrested for whipping his dick out in front of a group of children.
Okay, so maybe he was dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fucked up.
He's in trouble with the law. Like, he's taken away. And then at some point, and I'm not going to go too much into it, but Manson kills a guy whose name's like Latsapalota or something that happened to be a black man. I believe it was through some like drug deal type of thing with a spiker gang. But that guy had connections to the Black Panthers. And Manson became convinced that the Black Panthers were going to show up at Spawn Ranch and kill the family.
So Manson actually killed this guy.
He did.
Wow. I never knew of a person Manson actually killed.
Yeah. So during a few of their creepy crawly expeditions, which was something that they had recently started doing, it's this thing where the family would enter into a house and leave behind something to let people know they had been there without harming anyone, just to fuck with people. Manson had left a note for Dennis Wilson telling him, "You can't hide from me." And then another time he left a bullet, just a single bullet,
Oh, yeah.
to like freak Wilson out. He had also left something on Terry Melcher's beach house porch that kind of went unnoticed for a while. Melcher didn't even pay attention. Oh, I know what it was. I'm sorry. They stole a telescope off of Melcher's deck, and he thought it was just like some kids.
Oh, okay.
Right.
But it was them.
Yeah. Okay. So needing money to fund moving to Barker Ranch full time, and he'd also begun training the family for this apocalyptic event with knives and guns.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
I mean, up until now, it's all been peace and love, but
so now it's paramilitary
but now
training.
it's paramilitary training. He's got knives and guns. You got bikers bringing guns and knives and riding all around, and it looks like Mad Max or some shit, right? While Manson's like playing his guitar and singing. I don't know. It's like, anyway, I feel like this could be a musical.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So they need money for guns. They need money for knives. They also need money for this permanent move to Barker Ranch. He is consumed with money. Charlie is like, whatever we can do to make money, this is what we need to do. It was on July 25th of 1969 that Manson sent Bobby Beausoleil, Susan Atkins, and Mary Brunner to Gary Hinman's house. Manson thought that Hinman owned the house and the cars that were there and probably had money in stocks and bonds. Initially, Manson wanted the group to convince Gary to join the family and turn his assets over to Charlie. According to Beausoleil, Hinman had sold him some bad mescaline. The Straight Satans had paid $1,000 for this mescaline, and they said it was trash. So Beausoleil was like, they want their $1,000 back, or, it's going to be bad. Well, Hinman's telling him, like, it was not bad drugs. It was good drugs. I don't know what you're talking about. But the scene at Hinman's house quickly turns bad, Dylan. Beausoleil pulled a gun on Gary Hinman. After a beating, Hinman agreed to sign over the two vehicles, which I believe was like a Volkswagen and a Fiat, that were worth about $1,000. This satisfied the debt for the bikers, but not for Charlie, because Charlie wanted his action. Bobby called Charlie and explained that Hinman had no money. So a guy named Bruce Davis, who, we could go into this guy. There's like 3 unsolved murders that a lot of folks think he committed, Bruce Davis. So even outside of Manson, he was kind of like his own serial killer.
Really?
Just piece of shit guy. Yeah, we may talk about that at another time. Anywho, this guy Bruce Davis brings Manson over to Hinman's house. Charlie brings a samurai sword into the house, and he slashes Hinman's ear, telling him to surrender his money. And then Charlie leaves.
So he took the time to actually bring a sword,
Yes.
a samurai sword with him.
Yes.
So he could go in there and do this big showboating. He's always the performer, the showman, like you said. And to make this statement and then just leave directly
he
thereafter.
splits Hinman's ear like down the middle, right? And then he just leaves. Like, surrender your money, man. And then just walks out.
With a bloody tipped samurai sword. But at the same time, that makes perfect sense for Charlie to bring a samurai sword.
Does it?
In his world.
It's just such a random weapon.
Yeah, it's a very random.
And
weapon.
someone gave him the samurai sword, and I can't remember who it was at this point, but it was a gift. It was a gift to Charlie.
He's a Ronin, you know, a masterless samurai. Okay, that's one. Yeah, who takes a lot of LSD.
I was trying to think of like who makes the samurai sword in the Kill Bill movies, Hattori or something.
Something like that.
Hans Hattori, or I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean that's
I'm butchering it.
You're
Okay,
butchering
so for
it.
the rest of the Saturday and into Sunday, Bobby doles out prolific beatings while Susan and Mary beg Gary Hinman to please hand over any money that he has. They're like, please, this will stop. Like, and the ladies, I mean, it seems like they kind of feel bad about what's happening. At some point, they take dental floss and like sew up this guy's ear because it's just pouring blood. They're trying to like take care of him a little bit, and they're telling Bobby like, I think he's had enough, man. You know, like stop doing this.
I don't think he has any more stuff to give us, or he would have already.
So after all of this, again, Bobby is calling Charlie intermittently, like to update him on this lack of progress. Like, I've just been beating him for the last hour. He still isn't giving us anything. You know?
Charles like, I need to bring my sword back down there, man.
Yeah, this just keeps going on. At one point, Hinman threatens to call the police after they leave. And during one phone call, Bobby said, quote, he has half his ear cut off. He will call the police. And Charlie told him, you know what to do. What do you think that is?
Well, to kill him. Let's be honest.
Manson told him to make it look like the Black Panthers had done it.
How do you do that?
So after Hinman was killed, by the way, he's stabbed in the chest twice. The gang takes turns putting pillows over his face until he's just totally gone. Beausoleil then wrote "Political Piggy" in blood on the wall and drew a paw print in Hinman's blood because the paw print, I guess, was sort of the signature of the Panthers at the time, or was like their symbol that they were using. So they scrawled it out in blood. Gary died on the floor holding his prayer beads and chanting from his Buddhist faith, which is really sad.
Yeah, it's horrible that he was subjected to this torture and beatings and all this stuff and then killed, but just because someone else wanted his stuff. I mean, it's no grand, conspiracy, or it's just the age-old, I want what you have that I didn't earn, and I'm willing to kill you to get it.
Yeah, and here's Charlie, for the last 2 years has been preaching, give up your material possessions.
Right.
You don't need to own anything. But yet, he's a fucking greedy monster.
Yeah, he has been the whole time. It's
who
always,
wants all the shit. Exactly. Charlie wanted to keep the murders quiet and not let the rest of the family know what had happened. Bobby, however, wanted to tell everybody. Like, he was super proud of himself. He felt like a real man. Bobby told Danny DiCarlo, who was the straight Satan's treasurer, who in turn told Tex about the murder. Susan Atkins also couldn't keep quiet and told the other women. Yeller was so horrified by what she had learned that she, along with her secret boyfriend, another one of the followers that she had developed a relationship with behind Charlie's back, they left. She tried to talk Pat Krenwinkel into joining them, but Pat had remembered how at one point, like a year earlier, she had taken off with some guy, and Charlie had easily tracked her down. And so she thought this made Charlie like godlike,
Like
so
you couldn't get away from him if you wanted to.
So she was like, "Oh, I can't. He'll find us. I can't leave."
All you got to do is go 3 counties over. He's not going to be able to find you.
Right?
I mean, because he probably doesn't have any damn gas money.
So Yeller, her boyfriend, they bolt in the middle of the night, sneaking past Charlie's guards that he now has standing watch around the ranch. And Bobby Beausoleil's girlfriend, Kitty, who was pregnant at the time, heard what had happened and begged him to leave Spawn Ranch with her, but he refused. So she was another one that's like, I got to get the fuck out of here.
Well, it's too late. I mean, Bobby's the one who did this thing for Charlie, so he's knee deep in it.
On July 1st, friends dropped by Hinman's house and discovered his dead body. Law enforcement was able to find one clean fingerprint from the crime scene. And that's where we're going to end part 2, and part 3 is going to drop on Wednesday in place of a midweek.
Oh my God.
We will conclude Charles Manson with part 3. Dylan, I mean, we got a 2-hour episode here, basically.
I knew it had to be.
We got to end this shit, bro. We got to end it.
Holy cow. I got to go rest my brain.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, but it's very, very interesting.
Is it?
Well, I mean, all these other characters, I mean, you might have heard their name here and there, but to actually see their full involvement, some of the quirky, just out of the blue ways that some of these people came across Charlie and then fell under his spell, like Tex, for instance, picking up Dennis Wilson, hitchhiking and all that. It's just, and I didn't expect Bobby to become such a full-on participant of Charles is there and to actually kill someone for him. So it's just, yeah, it's very interesting. And it's scary at the same time to just, I don't know, just so many times like it could have worked out differently than it did.
Absolutely. And I think from this, we also learned that, there's been a lot of speculation over the years that Charlie didn't know Terry Melcher was no longer living at Cielo Drive, but that's untrue because Charlie knew he wasn't living there. Charlie visited that address, knew that other people were living there, and he also had sent members of his gang to do this creepy crawly thing
at his new residence.
At the new residence.
That's a very, very good point that a lot of times kind of gets glossed over, and a lot of people, you'll hear it. I've heard it many a time myself, that they went there expecting to find the guy you had a problem with, but then, found the other people. And that's just not the case. That's just not the case at all.
Not at all. Okay, so that's part 2, and we will be back on Wednesday with part 3, and I promise we won't have any more 3-part episodes for a while, because I know it's a lot.
Well, it's a lot for you. You're going to break your head.
We're going to have, I know it's going to end up being a whole fucking 6-hour, episode on Charles Manson.
Hey, we've been reticent.
We've got everything for your summer road trip right here.
We've been reticent, is that the right word, to do one of these very popular stories like this, but the fact that you've compiled all this information into one series is I've really enjoyed it, I must say.
Thank you. I know we've actually had a few of our listeners reach out and say, when I saw Manson, I was like, oh no. But then I listened to your episode and learned so much about him. Didn't know he was from Appalachia. Thought he was from California. Had no idea about his life growing up. I didn't know he was a career criminal, even as a kid. I mean, we did get a lot of positive feedback. So hopefully you learned some new things about Charles Manson in the first episode, maybe in the second episode. But I did kind of want to dive into some of the scene, the musicians he was rubbing elbows with.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, how crazy is it that Charles is knows Cass Elliot and Frank Zappa and Neil Young?
Yeah, I know.
Dennis Wilson.
Yeah, and more than one of them spoke favorably about him. So, I mean, that's just really a really wild scene, man.
I dig it, man. Do you dig it?
I'm going to dig it.
Okay, I'm going to dig getting into bed here in a minute. All right, so if you have a case suggestion, you can email us, mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com. We actually had someone send us a very cool West Virginia case.
Ooh.
We're going to have to cover it this month. I'm very excited about it.
Thank you.
All right, so hopefully you guys will have a great week, and we will be back on Wednesday.
Bye.
Part 3.